Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff. Alex, we're 3 weeks and 2 days away from opening kickoff when we're recording this. As always, thank you everybody for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please subscribe to us on the socials. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Threads. I guess Twitter is now X with the handle at N2EFantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's show?
All right. So today's show, we have news from around the league, and we will do our preseason, do our way too early comments on players that showed up or didn't show up in the games this week. So news-wise, we have a Cardinals signing and immediate injury to discuss. We have a retirement. We have the Kareem Hunt quest for a job at multiple different teams. We can talk about all the teams he's visited. We have trying to get some updates on Jonathan Taylor. We also have some updates on the Colts organization on their starting quarterback. We have prominent running backs, Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook, signing deals, and we can talk about who they went to. We also have news on J.K. Dobbins with the Ravens and how that Ravens backfield is going to look. And we have a Panthers wide receiver got injured. So we have all of those things to tackle. And Jeff, let's start with Marlon Mack and the Cardinals. He just signed with the Cardinals. We were going to put it on last week's episode, but last minute he got hurt. So now he's on this episode. He just signed, already tore his Achilles again, less than 1 week in. I don't know at this point, does he battle through it and try to come back next year, or does he hang up his cleats? What does this mean for him? What does this mean for the Cardinals? Jeff, take it away.
So we talked about last week that it's typically about 3 years from when you tear your Achilles until you're back to full speed as a running back. And Marlon Mack is 27 years old. And I think this can probably put a bow on his career. It's an absolutely brutal injury, and it's probably going to cost him his career. And I just absolutely feel terrible for him, and I wish him the best on whatever happens after this. But this is probably the last time that we'll ever talk about Marlon Mack.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that a player like him had these debilitating injuries. It's going to be really tough and more of an uphill battle for him to come back if that's what he wants. But man, that's just so brutal, and I wouldn't want that to happen to anybody. So I hope he gets a speedy recovery. Hopefully he can get his career back on track, but it does look like this is it for him.
So speaking of running backs that this is it for one of my personal favorites, Justin Jackson. He calls it a career after a couple of weeks ago re-signing with the Detroit Lions. What are your thoughts on Jackson? And this will be the last time we talk about him as well.
Yeah, he's always been a backup that you'd want to get as a handcuff in case the starting running back went down. But he's never really moved the needle for me. He never really lived up to his potential. So I think he realized he's in for a career backup role, and is that worth the punishment of multiple NFL seasons? And he ultimately decided to just call it, which might be the best move for him going forward. But he's certainly going to miss out on a big paycheck that most of us can't get in our day jobs. So it's an interesting move. I'm not sure exactly how old he is. I think he's in his late 20s. Is that right?
Yep. I believe he's
Okay.
27, so he is right up there.
All right. Well, the Lions have plenty of running backs to work with this year, so I don't think it's going to be a major hit for them. But Justin, you gave it a shot in the league. Congrats. Most people can't even get it that far. So
Absolutely. In his best years, we're backing up Eckler, and he was a valuable handcuff to Eckler, and he just really hasn't been able to recapture that magic since.
So we also have more running backs to discuss. Kareem Hunt continues his tour around the league. He has visited with the Saints. He has visited with Indianapolis, and he has visited with Minnesota. There's been multiple rumors that he signed with the Saints or he signed with Minnesota, but he still remains unsigned to this point. I have not seen a confirmation. Jeff, have you seen any confirmation on Kareem Hunt? Do you think he ends up with one of these teams? Do you think another team is lurking in the background? What do you think about Kareem Hunt?
So we've just seen that the money is out there for running backs right now, and we'll get into that because we do have a few free agent signings a little bit later. So the money is out there, but it does look like Kareem Hunt is looking for the perfect landing spot and the perfect opportunity, and I'm not really sure there is that right now. Now, with Minnesota, his last visit, he does have a shot to back up Madison. And then basically, if anything ever happened to Madison or Madison isn't the starting caliber running back, then he would be able to take over for that in that position. But he remains unsigned, and I'm hoping that he could get signed this week. He kind of spurred the Saints and he kind of spurred the Colts by the way that he took visits, and he kind of left there without a contract, even though it seemed hopeful in both areas.
Yeah, I think he probably comes back and maybe signs with the Saints, is my guess, unless another team emerges that wants to sign him.
Yeah, I mean, the Saints just signed running back Darrell Williams instead. So I don't know if they're in the market for a running back anymore. And I think Darrell Williams fits more of their need of a 3-week fill in for Kamara than Hunt. I think Hunt is looking for a more permanent position, and I don't think the Saints can offer him a permanent position with Kamara and Jamal Williams pretty much going to be carrying the load there after the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, and it certainly seems like the Colts didn't offer him enough money, so he moved on from them pretty quick. And speaking of the Colts, we don't have anything definitive on Jonathan Taylor yet. There have been rumors he might be coming back in a couple weeks, but we don't know that that's true. And they seem to be rolling with the running backs that they already have on roster. Obviously, they made the addition of Kenyon Drake last week, and they brought in a small school running back as well. I don't know if those guys make it fully. It looks like Kenyon Drake might be the most prominent guy that they're going to have on their roster. If for whatever reason Taylor doesn't fully come back or they can't resolve the situation, so that'll be interesting to follow. And that's not a situation that you want for a rookie quarterback. You want him to have the best talent around him as possible to give him the best chance. And it's not looking like he's going to have that good roster to start the year with. But they have named him the opening starter, Jeffrey. I know you were dead set that it was going to be Gardner Minshew day one, but it doesn't look like it. How do you feel about the running back situation, Jonathan Taylor, and with Anthony Richardson being named their week one starter?
Give me some Minshew mania, please. Guy can't go anywhere and get a starting job. He always gets superseded by Hurts and now Anthony Richardson. But rewinding to Taylor, he's in the process of coming back to camp right now, but they let him go off site to get treatment, which is pretty rare in today's NFL. They decided to have him away from the team was better than having him with the team. So I don't know if that spells out good things or bad things especially when you have a rookie quarterback. You could really use your all pro running back there. But kudos to Anthony Richardson for being named their week one starter. And I do think this year you're going to see a lot of ups and a lot of downs with Richardson as he grows into a potential NFL quarterback. I know he's one of your favorites. What do you think about Anthony Richardson?
I like him as a prospect, and I don't expect him to go lights out year one. I think he has a lot of development ahead of him. I think he has a lot of growing pains that he's going to have to play through. But I am encouraged. I am encouraged that he seems to be learning from mistakes and not making the same ones and growing. So I think there is a potential future there. And I will point out that I know Jeff and I have talked about this offline. I really think that we are so laser focused on immediate results in this age, and quarterbacks typically have taken a few years to develop, and especially if they're given the support that they need, it still takes some time to develop. And I estimate probably a 3-year timeline for him to really feel comfortable in the offense and start to really show everything that he can do. And that may not be enough for fans. That may not be enough for the ownership. I don't know, but I think the best approach for him is to really ease him into it and really uh, not count on him being a top 15 quarterback in the real NFL until year 3. And then you can decide whether to move on from that point. Jeff, I know you have feelings about Richardson that you don't necessarily think he's the best project and the prospect, and that they might be looking at quarterback next year. Do you think that's still viable, or how do you feel about that?
I do think that's viable because I think this is one of the worst rosters in the league. And if they're picking in the top 3 next year, they may decide to not go with, and I know you meant to say prospect, but you just said project. They might want to go with a prospect that is not as big of a project as Anthony Richardson. And I think that quarterbacks, especially quarterbacks that start year 1, we know pretty much what they are by Thanksgiving of year 2. So I know Justin Fields, I rag on him a lot because he's 5-21, but basically he did start to pick it up after Thanksgiving last year. So if you do look at like layers of success, that is one of the benchmarks of success is, can you pick it up after Thanksgiving of year 2? And we'll see what Richardson can do, and we'll see if the Colts have patience with him. They didn't give up extra picks for Richardson, so I think that is important to say because the 49ers gave up more picks, 3 picks for Trey Lance, and they're already ready to move on from him, and they invested 3 picks into him. So teams are known to move on quicker, and I don't think they spent a ton of capital on him, and I don't think they need to waste their time with him if they don't think he's it. But obviously, I hope that he is successful because I think the NFL is a much better product to watch when the quarterback play is great.
Yeah, and let me just play a devil's advocate for the theory that they might draft a quarterback next year. They might, and that's something that might happen. However, let's look at what just happened with the Bears this past draft, where they traded the first overall pick for a pretty large package and a starting wide receiver. If the Colts somehow got a top 2 pick and they wanted to give Richardson more time and surround him with more talent, which they don't have, even if they drafted another quarterback, they still wouldn't have the talent. What if they traded that pick for an even bigger haul? Since there's more prominent quarterback prospects, they traded it for a bigger haul to really revamp the entire roster and try to build around Anthony Richardson. I feel like that is also a possibility.
Yeah, it definitely is a possibility. But do you remember last year the Bears wouldn't even commit to Fields himself? Like he went on interviews saying he didn't know if he was the Bears quarterback. And I think if the prospects were better this year, the Bears wouldn't have kept Fields and they would have moved off of him. But I obviously have no way to prove that. But I don't feel like Young, Stroud, Richardson are the prospects of the upcoming 3 in next year's draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible they do the opposite, and it's possible they trade Richardson to someone who wants to work with him and get their package that way, rather than trading the pick. So that's possible as well. But let's talk more running back news. We actually have a couple different former Chiefs running backs that signed with teams. So Darrell Williams signed with the Saints. I don't know if that means that Hunt is out of the running there. And we also have Damian Williams signed with the Raiders. That could be another sign that Josh Jacobs is not coming back anytime soon. Jeff, do you think these guys stick on a roster? Do you think they have any kind of indication or signal any kind of indication that those running back positions are very in flux right now or in danger of not having their starters? What do you feel about those 2 signings?
So I've taken Damian Williams off my sheet for a while now. I just don't think he's had anything in the tank the last time that we saw him. I don't even know why the Raiders signed him, especially with Fournette out there and Cook and Elliott were still out there. And as I said a little bit before, Darrell Williams is going to be a 3-week fill in for the Kamara role. And then you're going to see Kamara, Jamal Williams, and Kendra Miller be the 3 backs in New Orleans. But I'm not so worried about Brandon Jacobs with the Damian Williams signing, but we'll see as we get a little bit closer.
Well, you said that you don't know why they signed Damian Williams when there's other running backs available. You've talked about in the past, the owner is very cheap. and one of the poorer owners in the NFL. So maybe this was the best bang for your buck kind of signing. So that's the only way that it really makes sense for me.
Yeah, I mean, and even like Daryl Henderson is still out there, and he's a younger back that still isn't latching onto a team, which always makes me go, like what's kind of going on there?
Well, there are some prominent running backs that did get deals. So it was just announced that the Patriots signed Ezekiel Elliott for 1 year, up to $6 million deal, and the Jets signed Dalvin Cook for a 1 year deal up to $8.6 million. These are pretty high, especially in this deflated running back market. What do you think this means for Stevenson and Brees Hall's values going into the year?
So I think the Elliott signing doesn't affect Stevenson's value too much. I think he'll be very close to last year's value, which his draft stock should fall a little bit. His ADP should fall a little bit. And that's when you can scoop him up and grab that value pick that you wouldn't have been able to a week or so ago when it was Steven season. As far as Brees Hall goes, Brees Hall, we should mention, was just activated from the PUP list. And basically, Cook isn't fully healthy either, as he's recovering from shoulder surgery, and he's about a week away from even being cleared for contact. So Hall and Cook are in like a race to get to the field first. And I don't honestly know who's going to hit the field first and be able to have like a full contact practice first. This is not an ideal situation for the Jets because they are running Carter and their rookie Izzy in the preseason and Zohan Knight. It's anyone's guess who's going to be the starter there. But if I had to guess long term, it's going to be Brees Hall's show. And I think Delvin Cook will be a really good supplemental piece to maybe take 40% of the workload away from Hall. And we know most backfields are split like 65-35, 60-40 anyways. So I think if anything, this kind of readjusts Brees Hall to a spot that makes it a little bit more comfortable to draft.
Yeah, so I pretty much agree with both of those takes. When it comes to the Patriots backfield, it does seem like the Zeke signing is more of an indictment to the other running backs on the roster behind Ramondre. So obviously, Bill Belichick wasn't comfortable, or maybe Bill O'Brien wasn't comfortable with the back's performance in practice or in preseason. So they wanted to bring in a veteran who could better back up Ramondre, maybe give him a breather every now and then to make him more efficient. I know that Zeke is a more efficient goal line back than Ramondre has been to date. That doesn't mean that Ramondre won't get goal line carries, but I think that Zeke will be more of a short yardage guy. I think he'll help out on passing downs as well. So he will eat in a little bit, but I think he just drops Ramondre's value just a little bit because I think Ramondre is still borderline RB1 for most teams out there in the fantasy world. And when it comes to the Jets, I do think that the Jets want to slow play Brees Hall and ease him back into the season, which means I don't think that he's going to finish as an RB1 this year. I do think that as the year progresses, they'll bring him back in more as his legs come back fully. Dalvin Cook has battled shoulder injuries since his college days, and so he always seems to have one, but he's played on bad shoulders, and he's done pretty well. I think that people overanalyze his efficiency in the passing game, especially the last couple of years. With the new offensive system, they weren't doing check down throws as much, and so it made it look worse for Cook than what it actually was. And I think that Aaron Rodgers wants to revive some of his best years with Green Bay, which employed two prominent backs. That being said, I think that surprisingly enough, I think that they will bring in Izzy a lot more week one and ease both of these vets in, and then it'll be a lot of Dalvin Cook split with Brees Hall. And as the season progresses, it'll be more Brees Hall throughout the year. Where that lands Brees Hall, we could definitely talk about later on this list. But I'm not so high on Brees Hall this year. I think he will be a phenomenal get next season. This season, take him with a little bit of caution. If you can have him sit on your roster a little bit until you see how things shake out, that would be optimal. But I wouldn't count on him to be a week-to-week starter at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, he could end up being a league winner at the end of the year once he's fully healthy and going, and the Jets' offense is actually going and full steam ahead.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. And we can talk about another running back that could make or break your fantasy season, and that is the Ravens running back J.K. Dobbins. He was just activated off the pup, and along with Cardinals activated their tight end Zach Ertz off the pup, which I think is a little earlier than people expected. So, do you think that J.K. Dobbins is going to be a fantasy contributor? Is he going to be someone you can start as an RB2? Where do you see him landing? I know you're not as high on Zach Ertz as I am. How do you feel about him coming off the pup this early? Do you think that's a good sign for him? Do you think that's a bad sign for McBride? What do you think about these two guys?
So I've stated offline that I do not believe I am worried about anyone missing week 1 currently out of any player that's injured. I think Dobbins' injury was a little bit of a hold in because they were discussing a long-term contract, and it doesn't seem that they came to an agreement, and he's now off the pup and practicing, and it seems like he's going to play under his current deal. And then with Zach Ertz, a tight end position is a lot easier to come off the pup and be eased back in, especially when they have their second year tight end right behind him. Basically, McBride will be able to fill in for Ertz as earlier in the season. And I know that McBride's going to have a big role on the Cardinals offense, especially after losing Hopkins. So I just think this is status quo. They get activated after week 1 of the preseason, and they'll get ramped up in practice during week 2, and they may or may not see the field for a drive in week 3. I'm personally of the persuasion that running backs, especially starting running backs, shouldn't see any of the field in preseason. I think you should save those hits for the regular season, but that's okay. Everyone has a little bit of a different philosophy on that. What are your thoughts on these two coming off the pup and now finally ready to at least start participating in practice somewhat?
I'm still out on J.K. Dobbins. I don't want him at all this year. Like you said, there's the contract issue. He's always seems to be injured. I know under Greg Roman's offense, Lamar Miller has Lamar Jackson every time. Lamar Jackson has been the primary ball carrier. I don't know how much that changes under the new system with Monken. Maybe Dobbins can do well, but he's still being drafted too high for my taste to throw the dice. I like Zach Ertz. I probably would want to pair him with another tight end that is healthy so that I don't 100% rely on him. But I still like Ertz. I still think he's better than McBride. I'm not as big a fan of McBride as some of the other fantasy community people are, but I'm glad that these guys are coming off the pup and at least practicing and hopefully can turn their careers around.
Absolutely. And it looks like we have a couple of injuries to monitor. It looks like Terrace Marshall from the Carolina Panthers, their wide receiver, was carted off with a back injury. And the Chiefs wide receiver, Justin Ross, suffered a leg injury and was carted off as well. And it seems to be a hamstring injury, which we get a ton of those in the preseason.
So these are after the week 1 preseason games where it looked like these guys were already being they were already being phased out and already at the bottom of their depth chart. So I don't know if they were going to end up rising at some point, but this is not a way to work your way up the depth chart to get hurt. And it happens. I'm not saying it's their fault to get hurt, but injuries are not going to help them advance. So Terrence Marshall seems firmly behind DJ Chark and Adam Thielen and even the rookie out there. That I think those three are the starters, and Terrence Marshall is below them. And Justin Ross has been a offseason warrior that everyone wants to tout. He's been an offseason superstar that people keep talking about some of the plays that he makes, but he didn't start in preseason, and now he has a leg injury. So those guys are going to be starting at the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we do need to point out to be careful in the preseason to take it too seriously. I don't know if Kansas City or any other team or Carolina is going to show who their top wide receivers are, or I don't know if they're going to show everything in the preseason. We have seen wide receivers come out of nowhere in week 1 that weren't preseason darlings.
Yep, I agree. But we're starting to talk about the preseason here, so let's move on from league news and we can start talking about some of these games and players that we liked or didn't like based on some of their early performances week 1. So the theme of the preseason seems to be quarterback play, and it seems to be that first round quarterbacks struggles quite a lot, whereas the mid and late round rookies somehow were thriving out there. Granted, I'm sure competition has part to do with it, but it seems like pressure has a lot to do with it as well. So we can start with the Texans and Pats. CJ Stroud played the least amount of the first round rookies, but he looked like the game was way too fast for him. He stared down his wide receivers. He obviously was against a Bill Belichick defense, and maybe not all the starters were out there, but it's still a Bill Belichick led defense. So it was always going to be tough. But he did not have a good first showing. I don't think that that means it's the end of the world for CJ Stroud, but it was definitely brutal as a fan to watch. I thought Tank Dell and his supporting cast there looked really good and was making plays all over the field. And I think he's someone that if he played for a bigger school than the University of Houston, I think he would have been drafted much higher up, despite the fact that he's 165 pounds and 5'8". So I think that was encouraging. Didn't see much from Nico Collins, didn't see much from Mechie. That was just the first game, and there's 3 more to go, so we'll see how much they get to play. Jeff, what were your takes on the Texans and Pats game and those players?
Well, it seems like the Texans made a really good call on not starting Dameon Pierce because we were just mentioning before that it's probably better to save your starting running back. The running back won some hits in the preseason. Unless there's an injury that I'm missing there, I did see Singletary got a few carries. It did look like Davis Mills outplayed Stroud, which is interesting because it's a little bit of a quarterback competition. I don't believe Stroud's been named the week 1 starter yet. And it's also a really good reminder that Bill Belichick will always be a master of defense and to not underestimate one of his defenses, even if the offense is not very good at all.
What do you think about Tank Dell out there? I know it's someone I've been chirping at you for a while.
He looked explosive. He's going to move up ADP, and I don't know. I guess my question is how is he with Stroud at quarterback if Stroud is starting week 1?
Well, Stroud's interception was throwing to Tank Dell. So
Ay.
one of these wide receivers with Houston might rise to wide receiver 34, and it might very well be Tank Dell instead of the other guys that people have been stomping for in Nico Collins.
I'm not a Collins believer. You already know that. So I prefer Mechie, and I do believe that Mechie played with the starters. So I'm still looking out for that. But it does seem like Robert Woods might be the odd man out.
He might have gotten a veteran day. I really don't know. I haven't heard anything about Robert Woods in camp. I don't know anything about how he's coming along, which is very odd because he is someone who in the past the fantasy community has loved, and I don't know what's going on with him. Let's talk about your team now. So the Panthers and Jets played, and Rodgers obviously didn't play in that matchup, but I thought that Garrett Wilson did well with Rodgers talking in his ear, and I thought it was interesting with Bryce Young that they really had him on a fast pace, like get the ball out quickly, don't get hit kind of offense, which is exactly what you'd want to do. So I think that's good from the coaching staff because he is a slighter frame. You don't want him to take too many hits. He did end up taking a couple hits, and I was cringing when that happened. I'm like, oh no, is he going to get hurt here? But he survived it, and it looks like he has an early connection with the veterans there. So Adam Thielen, who's playing primarily out of the slot, and you got DJ Chark as well. And then they also had their rookie wide receiver too. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they're still trying to figure some stuff out. It'll just be really interesting to see the growth from game 1 to game 2. And the Panthers have to do better than 165 total yards on week 2. I'm really hoping they do because they didn't really put a lot on tape here this week 1.
But Jonathan Mingo, that rookie that I was referencing, has climbed up the depth chart already and looks like he's already ahead of Terrence Marshall, who now has an injury. So do you think we've been sleeping too much on Jonathan Mingo? Do you think that maybe we should have him higher up on our list?
So he might have started, but he didn't have any targets. So it makes me wonder if Carolina is giving all the looks that they want to give for the regular season. And I mean, they didn't play Sanders, and they also didn't even play Andy Dalton. So it feels like Carolina treated this like a true exhibition, and they probably wanted to see what Bryce Young and Mingo could do on the field together.
I think that we might see more Mingo in the next game, but it's certainly
For
someone that I
sure.
want to keep track of. But we can talk about now the other first round quarterback, Anthony Richardson with the Colts, who played Buffalo. And I thought that, like everyone else, the very first drive, that brutal interception, that was horrific and terrible to see in a first round rookie. I do think that happens to a lot of rookies as well. And I thought it was encouraging that he kept playing better as he went forward. I've heard that they were trying to keep the offense, like most coaches do, very vanilla, and they told him not to run as much and don't take as many hits. So he tried to stay more in the pocket. It is encouraging he couldn't get sacks. They tried and they just couldn't bring him down. So that body frame is certainly helping him. But he did recover towards the end of his play where he threw a near touchdown that should have been a touchdown. Alec Pierce, the wide receiver, dropped the ball in the end zone, couldn't hold on to it. But if he had gotten that catch, I think a lot of people would have a better viewpoint of Anthony Richardson and be more encouraged. I've seen a lot that I'm encouraged by, and I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing him improve next game. Jeff, what's your takeaways? I know we've talked about Richardson a few times.
So, I mean, Richardson looked okay. He rebounded from his brutal pick to begin. We're looking out in the Colts backfield to see who has the lead for the RB2. Does look like Evan Hall started early, but it does look like he was outperformed by Deion Jackson. Deion Jackson is the incumbent there. It does look like they both outperformed Kenyon Drake. So I think the backfield behind Jonathan Taylor is wide open. And I'd probably give a little bit of a leg up to Deion Jackson at this point. And then from the Buffalo side, James Cook scored a rushing touchdown. We will see what happens with James Cook as we enter the season, especially when he has Harris and Latavius Murray behind him as well.
Yeah, so I will just say that Evan Hull, he did start out as the running back with the Colts. He looks like he's the primary passing down back if Jonathan Taylor misses time. And Deion Jackson looks more like the actual run between the tackles, rushing running back. So they would probably be a platoon. Kenyon Drake played with a worse offensive line, and the Colts offensive line isn't great to begin with. So maybe if Kenyon Drake, once he gets the playbook down, maybe he would start over one of these guys, or maybe both of them. I don't know yet. As far as James Cook, you know how much I love James Cook. He's my sleeper. I think he's a winner for you guys. I think he's a league winner, and he looks great. I think he's the guy there, and I feel reaffirmed in my decision and my liking of him. So I'm happy with his performance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we can move
What do we
on
got?
to the Titans and Bears. The Titans, they obviously were sitting Ryan Tannehill and they were trying to figure out who the number 2 quarterback is. So Will Levis and Malik Willis were rotating series throughout the entire game. And Malik Willis dramatically outplayed Will Levis, in my opinion. I think that's most people's viewpoints. He looks night and day different than the work that he put in last year. He looks like he's improved quite a bit. And Will Levis has all of the flags that people pinpointed during the draft process. So I don't think Will Levis is a threat to be a starter this year. I don't think that he even has the threat to unseat Malik Willis as the QB2 there. So that was interesting to see that play out. Jeff, I don't know how you feel about those quarterbacks, but I know on the other side, Justin Fields was very hyper efficient with three passes for like 160 yards and a few touchdowns. That was pretty impressive.
It was. And I think DJ Moore scored a touchdown, and that actually looked really good there. I think the Bears offense as a whole looked much better. What do you feel with that?
Yeah, their passing offense looks better because they were short routes. So I think it was total like 7 air yards, but they got all of it after the catch. And I think that DJ Moore looks explosive. I think Khalil Herbert looks explosive. On the rushing side, they didn't do spectacularly with the starting unit. So I think that there's still some offensive line coaching that needs to happen with the interior guys. But overall, this offense looks way better than it did last year. And I think that they have a chance to really be something special if things go their way this year.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like they have two running backs there now too, so there is that. It does look like Herbert has the early lead, but it does look like Roshan also looked good to be the RB2 there.
Yeah, I really liked Roshan's play. He came in as the third running back, maybe the fourth, but he had about four broken tackles and he had some really nice plays. He's the best pass blocker out of the bunch, and he's definitely got more juice than Foreman, who was in front of him this week. I think coming into game two, I think that he's probably going to end up moving up to the number two spot on the roster behind Herbert, and they might be a really good 1-2 punch. So
Yeah,
I'm very encouraged there.
absolutely.
It's both of our guys. You like Herbert, I like Roshan, but I think both of them are going to be pretty nice in that offense.
I'm hoping so. I'm hoping so. I think Herbert's a steal at where he's going right now in drafts.
Yeah, he's what, seventh round right now?
Yep.
Okay. So we can move on to some quarterback play with the Washington and Cleveland matchup. And that would be the starting quarterback for Washington, Sam Howell. After a couple of slow drives where the offensive line looked like they couldn't block anybody, he really started to pick it up. Maybe that was Cleveland started to use some of their backups by that point. I'm not 100% sure, but Sam Howell looked very efficient. He looked very good. It's an encouraging sign for a team that has not had a legitimate starter for the past few years. And we can also talk about Dorian Thompson Robinson, who has been lighting it up for the last two games for Cleveland since they had that extra Hall of Fame game. He seems like a rookie quarterback that a lot of teams slept on because he has been killing it in the stat sheet and he looks great on film. Jeff, how do you feel about both of those quarterbacks?
So the jury's still out on Howell, and I'm hoping that he does well. And I think that his job's a little bit in jeopardy just with a new owner. So just something to watch out there. And then Dorian Thompson Robinson, he's pretty much locked up the number two job in Cleveland. And I can't ever see him unseating Deshaun Watson. So I just think that we're not going to mention him that much unless something happens to Watson.
It's possible they bring him in as some special packages. Like he's a decent rusher anyway, and they might use him creatively. But
Watson is too.
should anything happen to Watson, I think that they have a pretty decent backup in the making. So he definitely has outplayed Kellen Mond, who has continued his tour to get run out of the league.
Yeah, he's about done, in my opinion. Sadly.
All right. There wasn't a crazy lot in that game to talk about, so we can move on to the Packers and Bengals, and that was everyone was keyed on Jordan Love to see how Jordan Love did, and I think everyone's looking at what running back is going to showcase themselves behind Joe Mixon. So, what did you think about Jordan Love's first preseason performance this year? And one of the guys that you've previously liked, Chris Evans, looked like he was pretty good in this game. How do you feel about those guys?
So I'll start off with the Chris Evans piece, and I feel terrible about that because I have given up on him in Dynasty, and now he's decided to finally show up to the show. So it just figures that that's happening now in year 3. There's still some time with Chase Brown behind there as well, and Chase Brown got a little bit of run as well. And he also got 3 grabs for 33 yards. So it does look like maybe they have defined roles for their the backfield there behind Joe Mixon. But as far as Love goes, he's in year 4 and he's not impressive yet, like not impressive enough. He had a few overthrows that you absolutely shouldn't have in year 4. It'll be interesting to see because now the team is his to see if he takes any step forwards in the upcoming weeks. Before, when he started, he always knew that he was going to give the reins back to Aaron Rodgers, and that's just not the case anymore. What was your thoughts?
So he looked a little bit more comfortable. He looks to me like a game manager. I don't know why, but he seemed like he was throwing the ball as hard as he can on every throw, which I don't know why. I guess he's not fully comfortable yet to get the touch, but his decision making was better than I've given him credit for. But I still don't see him as that great of a quarterback. I need to see a little bit more. Hopefully, when he plays more series and has more throws, at least more than the 10 attempts that he had, we'll see just how good he is. It was a lot of short throws, so I want to see him stretch the field a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. We will see what happens in week 2, and we want to see the growth in year 2.
We've got a few rookie running backs to discuss in the next few games here, and that is the Vikings at Seahawks. We have Ty Chandler, who I think is a second year running back, looks to be cementing himself as the number 2 behind Madison. And Madison, as you guys who have followed our videos know, that we're not super high on him, and it's possible someone unseats him at some point, and it very well could be. Ty Chandler could be someone who could really put some pressure on Madison. And then we also had Charbonnet got to play as well as JSN, and both of them looked pretty decent in their showing out there. So I'm very intrigued by these three guys: Ty Chandler, Charbonnet, and JSN. Jeff, how do you feel about them and that matchup?
So I feel really good about them. I feel like JSN's being a little bit overdrafted right now because he is the third receiving option on that team. He's going ahead of some wide receiver 2s on other teams. And we will see what happens with Ty Chandler. I'm really high on him, and I'm also high on Charbonnet with what happens with Kenneth Walker, who Pete Carroll said today that he expects Kenneth Walker back for week 1. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with those two backfields, as well as JSN, what happens with him being the third receiving option, maybe even deeper receiving option in that league.
Yeah, for me, JSN is more of a dynasty play right now than he is a redraft. And I agree with you. He's just being taken too high. You still got Metcalf, you still got Lockett, and there's no reason for JSN to be taken over some of the established veterans that are number 2s. In some cases, I feel like probably over someone's number 1 at this point too, which I don't think is a smart play. So maybe fans are a little bit over eager on him right away, but there's a lot to be excited for. He is a very talented wide receiver. Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker are probably going to be a discussion the entire offseason, throughout preseason. We really want to know how everything shakes out. We want to know their health. That's going to be the primary factor with these two guys. So ultimately, I see Charbonnet being a very prominent backup with Kenneth Walker. But if Kenneth Walker is not ready to go week 1 and Charbonnet is, I could see Charbonnet starting off the year as the number 1, the week 1. So it's possible. There's certainly a pathway to that. But we can move on to a duo of running backs that we have talked about as our sleepers, Tank Bigsby and Deuce Vaughn. So I really like Tank Bigsby, and he officially is the only rookie running back that logged a snap with the primary starting offense. So that is quite a feature, and he looks like he might be the short yardage back, so the goal line back, as well as be involved in the passing game. Whereas Deuce Vaughn, like you pinpointed your comp, he looked like a clone of Darren Sproles. So he looked quite good, and he actually ran up the middle as well as a little guy and was able to pull it off. So he looked quite sprightly out there. So I'm very excited about these two guys. Jeff, how do you feel about them? And was there any other thing that you noticed in the Cowboys Jaguars game?
No, I'm really happy to see, and I'm a little sad to see as well, because they'll probably start to shoot up draft boards, and we both are dreading that a little bit.
Yeah. So that's the unfortunate side to this business, is talking about guys that we like and people being able to find out and use that against you potentially. But I'm still excited about them, and I feel like I'm savvy enough by this point. I can still draft well despite people knowing my thoughts. So that's the hope anyway.
If other
All
people
right.
go up, then other people need to go down. So you just got to zig when other people zag.
Yep. So we can talk about the Giants and Lions game as well. And we are both huge fans of Jahmyr Gibbs, and he got some work early in that game, and he looked great. He was used all over the place, which is very exciting because that's exactly what we want to see with that type of player. And Jameson Williams, despite his upcoming suspension, got some work as well, and he looked decent. Jeff, how did you feel about these two guys?
I'm excited to see what Jameson Williams can do when he comes back. I do fear that Jahmyr Gibbs is being overdrafted a little bit, especially in redraft leagues. They both looked pretty good to start off week 1 in the preseason.
So is Jahmyr Gibbs rising to the point where you are actually considering David Montgomery instead for the value?
How about neither? I still got
For those
Montgomery
of
my
you
30th back.
for those of you who haven't been following, I am much higher on David Montgomery than Jeff is. He's not been on Montgomery for a while now.
This is true.
Okay. Well, there wasn't much on the Giants side that got me excited, so it was just those two guys for the Lions. We can move on to one of your running backs that you're excited for with the Dolphins, Devon Achane. I think he pretty much started, I think, in the game, and he looked pretty decent. Got a lot of play. The Falcons basically rested everyone on offense, so nothing to talk about there. Jeff, how'd you feel about Devon Achane's first game in preseason?
So I think my first thought about is it Devon or Devon is how
I've been
to
saying Devon, but you can say
okay
however you want.
is so the thing to think about with his last name is I have been listening to radio and they've been saying Achain. So we do need to figure out how to say his name at some point. Achain, Achain. I do really like him. I do think he's going to fly up draft boards, but I do think at some point he's going to make Mostert, Wilson be more steals in this upcoming redraft season.
Yeah, I think some fans could get too excited that he's going to contribute a lot right away, and you're right. These other guys might be the value play. I think it's probably going to be a mixed backfield, but I think yeah, it is Devon because it's DE apostrophe Vaughn, and I'm going to say A Chain because that sounds better to me. But I think that Devon A Chain is the long term play for especially for Dynasty. However, people might be getting too excited too early.
Absolutely. And it does look like he's a receiving option out of the backfield. And I think that's a big deal.
Yep. I agree. So we can move on to the Steelers and Bucks matchup, and I actually thought the Steelers offense was way better than I thought it was going to be. It looks like Kenny Pickens is Kenny Pickett is really picking up the offense, and I thought that that he peppered the wide receivers there pretty well. So Deontay Johnson got 3 catches, and Pickens got a touchdown. I didn't really see Allen Robinson. I don't know if he was out that week or not, but the Pittsburgh Steelers look really great. On the other side, I don't think that Tampa Bay looked very good, but clearly Baker is way ahead of Kyle Trask. So I don't think it's much of a competition anymore. That's kind of sad for the Buccaneers. But ultimately, I think that if you have guys like Mike Evans, I think Baker is more likely to target that type of wide receiver. So it's good if you like Mike Evans. I don't know how Godwin fits into the equation. I don't think that Baker's really hit slot guys as frequently, especially with his time in Cleveland.
He did pretty well with Landry. Landry outscored OBJ a lot. So I believe that would be the case here too with Godwin and Evans. But backing up to the Pittsburgh side of it, Kelvin Austin, who is a second year, but it's essentially his first year, looked really good on the field, and he does seem like he could be a difference maker on this offense, and he does seem like he is someone that's going to earn playing time ahead of Allen Robinson in 3 wide receiver sets.
So just to pump the brakes a little bit on that, because I agree, he's someone that I've liked. I've stashed him on a roster
Me too.
before, and I will just point out though that his stats all came with the second team offense with Mason Rudolph as the quarterback. So I would definitely like to see him play with the ones and see how he does with Kenny Pickett. And he very well could replace Allen Robinson because I think he has a lot more juice coming into a second year than Allen Robinson at this stage in his career. So that is very encouraging for him. Kudos to him for coming back healthy and playing very well right off the bat.
Yeah, I'm excited for him. I am in the camp that Allen Robinson is at the end of his career, so we will see.
It's also a nice contrast that Pittsburgh offensive line looks better than it did last year with a new tackle in Broderick Jones and Darnell Washington, who also got a nice grab in that game and helped block. I think that they look much more comfortable, whereas the Bucks, after they traded away Shaq Mason, like they don't look as good. They obviously don't have Brady helping them look better, and they look like they're crumbling. And that Baker, when he doesn't have protection, he starts to make some really bad decisions. So that's something that could come up during the year.
Yes, it could. So we will see what happens there, but they didn't have a lot of their starters playing either. So they didn't have their starting running back. I don't think Evans or Godwin played at all. So I think it's really hard to judge Baker with that offense right now. So I think it's only going to improve for him, is basically what I'm saying.
We can hope. We can certainly hope. So
Got to
let's
improve
move
a
on.
little bit.
Yeah, let's move on to another team that we hope is improving, and that is the Denver Broncos, who played the Cardinals. It looks like Russell is end of the year Russell from last year instead of beginning of the year. He looked a little bit more comfortable in Sean Payton's offense than Nathaniel Hackett's. He got that touchdown pass as well to Jerry Jeudy. So it looks like Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton are the favorites to get the targets, and that should be obvious based on who's left at the wide receiver position at this point for this team. Those two are the most prominent. I thought it was interesting, though, that Adam Troutman got the start at tight end over the now sophomore Greg Dulcich. So, what do you think that means? Do you think that it's you have to earn it, kid, or do you think Adam Troutman really will be the starting tight end come week 1?
So I think that Sean Payton wants Troutman to be the number one, and I think it's a stupid depth chart move, especially with Dulcich entering year 2. Another stupid move that Peyton has made was the kicking situation. I don't know if you saw how bad that the field goal kickers were for Denver, but it made me wonder why they gave up on McManus.
Yeah, we're looking at 3 missed field goals. It certainly wasn't that great.
No, ugly.
How do you feel about Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton after that game?
I'm not going to end up with any shares of them because I'm a lot lower than both of them on the market, but I do think that they're both being targeted more. And I do think that's part of the Sean Payton offense is to be very precise with what target that you're going to, being a little less ad-libby, for lack of a better word. That means Russ is going to have more timing throws to his big-time wide receivers that they've paid.
Well, on the other side of the field, we got the Cardinals, and what was noteworthy to me is rookie Michael Wilson looks like he's already ahead of Rondale Moore. So it looks like they were using Michael Wilson on 2 wide receiver sets, using him on the outside, and Rondale Moore really only came in on 3 wide receiver sets and played from the slot. So that's interesting to me. It looks like Michael Wilson's on the rise and Rondale Moore is falling there. How do you feel about those 2 guys?
No, I like that swap. It makes sense to have Wilson, who's actually their tallest wide receiver, be out there. Rookie, try to get the most out of him. It'll just be really interesting to see if Kyler can make it back for week 1.
Okay, so we have 4 more games to briefly discuss here. So we have the Eagles at Ravens. And what I thought was interesting in this matchup is the Ravens' backup running backs look like they did pretty well. And it's hard for me to determine now who's going to be the backup behind J.K. Dobbins and if Gus Edwards or Justice will actually potentially supplant J.K. Dobbins at some point in the year. Like this backfield to me looks more messy than before. And on the same token, I don't know who the starting Eagles running back is. I don't know if Kenny Gainwell, who got the veteran day off, I don't know if he is the starter. I don't know if Rashad Penny is going to be the starter. I don't know if DeAndre Swift is the starter. I don't think it's Trey Sermon, but Trey Sermon got a touchdown this game. So I don't know what to make of either of these backfields. Can you sift through it for me?
Man, I have no idea what is going to happen with that backfield. I have a few shares of Gainwell, and I do believe that he might be the leader in the clubhouse, and I do think Penny's falling, but I think this is going to be a week-to-week game for the Eagles. It's going to be a week-to-week game for the Ravens as well. I do think Dobbins is the leading rusher, but after that, like I'm cutting bait on Gus Edwards in every league that I have him because I do think that Melvin Gordon could be the primary backup there. It's anyone's guess right now.
I didn't even bring up Melvin Gordon. So behind J.K. Dobbins right now, they have Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, and Melvin Gordon. So any of those
Yeah.
3 could be the number 2. I clearly don't know yet. And I don't even know if Dobbins is going to hold on to his starting job. So it all remains to be seen. And obviously, that Jackson has been their primary rusher from the quarterback spot. And behind him, Tyler Huntley, who for some reason was playing behind Josh Johnson in this game, he's reaffirmed himself as the number 2 behind Jackson, in my opinion. And he is also one of these rushing quarterbacks as well. So I'm not touching any running back on the Ravens. I'm probably not touching any running back at this point on the Eagles either. It's just too uncertain for me. It might be a waiver wire pickup situation either way. But I will say that I was very impressed with Tanner McKee as a quarterback in this game, which is very strange that he doesn't fit either the Jalen Hurts or the Marcus Mariota mold of the two guys that are in front of him. He's more of a traditional pocket quarterback. He kind of reminds me a little bit of more of the Wentz mold back when Wentz was the starting quarterback for the Eagles. His stats don't show it, but he actually played much better than 50% completion percentage. He put the ball right where it needed to be with Tyree Cleveland. And Tyree Cleveland, despite having 5 catches for 68 yards, which was the leader in the clubhouse, he should have had 10 catches, I feel like, for over 100 because Tanner McKee put the ball right in his hands in a position where the defender couldn't even get it. So I was impressed there, and I was impressed with Tyler Huntley also. Both of these guys playing as the third string quarterbacks.
Yeah, and let's hope that we only talk about them during the preseason, because if we have to start talking about backup quarterbacks in the regular season, that means that an offense probably went pretty wrong.
Especially considering that both the starting quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, both got new contracts this offseason. So it's not like the teams can move on easily from them at this point. So, yeah, but potentially these guys could be trade bait down the line or just really, really good quality backups.
Yep, and I would assume that they don't get traded because they say one of the most important positions is your backup quarterback.
That's right. We have here just a couple more games, and that will be the 49ers at Raiders, which used to be all in the same town. Now the Raiders are in Las Vegas. So the 49ers came to town, and surprisingly, the Raiders just blew them out of the water in this preseason matchup, which I thought was very interesting. So Niners put Trey Lance as the starter for this matchup, letting Brock Purdy continue to get healthy. And while Trey Lance on the stat sheet looked okay, his actual play during the game was pretty horrendous. He got very fortunate with a bounce touchdown off of a bad decision. And I think that Sam Darnold, who is one of your quarterbacks that you've liked for a few years, came off the bench and he looked to me better in real game situations than his stat sheet shows. So I think that there's a real chance Sam Darnold moves up to the QB2 spot by the time week 1 comes. And Trey Lance has really got to earn that starting role, or at least backup role at this point. Whereas on the flip side, a rookie that not very many people had high expectations for, but he was, like Tanner McKee, was on my rookie quarterbacks list for the draft prep. Aiden O'Connell played very well in this game, and almost so well that I'm starting to think that they might want to move on to him over Jimmy Garoppolo week 1, because Jimmy Garoppolo is not very exciting. I don't think he's not 100% healthy. He's healthy enough to practice. I think that with a bad Raiders team, they may want to move to an Aiden O'Connell to see what they have going into the season. And maybe that team isn't as bad off as we thought. So, Jeff, what do you make of all these guys and this preseason matchup?
Oh boy. So I think this is the preseason. I do think this is Jimmy Garoppolo's team. And I don't think that you're going to see that change not early. A lot of it's going to depend on Josh Jacobs, wherever he comes back and lands. Zamir White does seem to be the guy that to own as a handcuff, which, as we talked about, this is his second year. So this is the year that we would expect him really to take a stride in that department. Also, he's a guy that could start year 3 and year 4 of his contract as well. And Jacobs could be moved on to a new team. But other than that, like, Lance seems to be on his way out of town as long as Purdy is healthy. And Darnold does seem to be the backup there. It does seem like they're trying to showcase Lance to get some value for him this time of the year.
I liked what I saw from Zamir White. Like you said, he looks like the primary handcuff, that if Josh Jacobs doesn't come back, he probably will start. And he might actually be okay. He might actually be a good person to roster. So far it's encouraging. I know it's not 100% of the starting lineup from the 49ers defense, but it's still the 49ers defense. So that was very encouraging. As far as Jimmy Garoppolo goes, it's almost reminiscent of the Seahawks when they got Matt Flynn, but they drafted Russell Wilson in the middle rounds. and Russell Wilson ended up starting. So I do see that as a possibility. With the other guys that we've talked about shining, with Tanner McKee, with DTR, those guys are behind established NFL starting quarterbacks that have guaranteed money and are not going to be going anywhere. Whereas Jimmy Garoppolo's deal is very much they're very much able to get out of it. He doesn't have the gravitas, or he doesn't have the standing to really keep that job if Aiden O'Connell really is as good as he looks week one of preseason. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out.
Completely agree, and we will see how it shakes out over the next 2 weeks.
All right. So what we might not agree on is the Chargers and Rams players that we want to discuss. So Quentin Johnston and Stetson Bennett, they are who we thought they were. And to me, that means Quentin Johnston is someone who is going to have some drop issues because he's not a very physical wide receiver. He catches the ball close to his chest. He doesn't attack the ball. He is someone that if he's under press coverage or he's with an experienced defensive back who's going to challenge him, he's not going to get those grabs. He's not going to get contested balls. And that's something that I saw in his college film. And that's something that I saw in this game where he had 5 targets and he caught 2 of them. He did catch a touchdown, though. So, Jeff, I'm sure that you're going to have the complete opposite take from me. You're going to be much more positive. And I thought Stetson Bennett, he he's a better version of pro Johnny Manziel, which is going to have ups and downs. He's going to be the gunslinger. He's going to extend plays. He's going to have good plays. He's going to have some risky plays. And that is exactly what he did in this matchup. So maybe he can fine tune it a little bit going forward. But they do have Matthew Stafford there. So I don't foresee Stetson Bennett going out there unless Matthew Stafford is ailing or just can't get his arm healthy. So how do you feel about these 2 guys that I just mentioned?
Oh boy. So Quentin Johnston, I feel really good about him this year because he is going to see single coverage. He's not going to have that many contested catches because he's the 3rd wide receiver on the team. So he's not going to see the primary coverage at all on that team. So I do see him getting a lot of one-on-one. As long as he beats his guy, he could be off to the races. I do think that Stetson Bennett was drafted to be Stafford's backup for 4 years and not to be a replacement. So that is kind of how I still feel about that as well. And I do see that Puka is on your list, Zach Evans, or some of my preseason love list. I do think the Rams quietly restocked their cupboards, and I think they're going to be a better team than it was than they're advertised for, than you think they're going to be. And then Spiller and Josh Kelly, that is a head scratcher because I had given up on Josh Kelly so many years ago, and Spiller was supposed to be the guy that took over for Eckler, and I just don't see it anymore.
Yeah, it was very strange seeing Kelly being trotted out over Spiller because Spiller was supposed to be extremely talented, and it just hasn't materialized yet. So it's interesting. Eckler may end up getting his money if those are the guys that stay behind him at this point. But you're right about Zach Evans and Puka Nacua. I think that despite trading away a lot of picks over the past few years, I think that the Rams quietly and smartly picked up some quality rookies that were maybe slept on by other teams. And Puka, I believe he got a touchdown in that matchup, and Zach Evans got some work as a running back in this matchup. So those are really good depth guys. A lot of people think Tutu Atwell is going to be the wide receiver 3 for the Rams. I really think Puka is going to climb up and potentially end up as the 3rd wide receiver there. So maybe there is some hope for you Rams fans. Maybe they will be a little bit better. I think overall as a team, I'm still not super excited this year. They still have a chance to retool and maybe bounce back fully next season, but they may not be fully the bottom dwellers that I anticipated them to be this season. So I thought that those were some interesting calls there. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we can move on to the last game that we can talk about, and that is the Saints versus the Chiefs. The Chiefs typically play it close to the vest preseason, so they didn't have a lot to highlight on. Jeff, you had pinpointed Clyde Edwards-Helaire as potentially being someone who might have a little bit of a bounce back year this year, and it certainly looked like the Chiefs tried, but he didn't really go anywhere in this matchup. I do think the Saints are a quality team this year, so that's the number one reason why, and maybe Clyde can get a little bit more space in another game. But what looked really great was the entire Saints offense. And Kamara, despite having suspension looming over the first 3 weeks, they put him in there, and he looked great, both as a runner and as a receiver from the backfield. And I thought Carr looked great. He did target Michael Thomas, who was nice to see him survive a game and not come up with an injury. That's really the best I can say about him. This matchup, he just had 2 targets, 1 catch, I think. But A.T. Perry, who is a wide receiver that I liked, also had a good game with the backups. So Saints look like a team that might win their division. I do think it's going to be tough competition with the Falcons. I know you have some feelings about the Panthers potentially being up there in that division too. But how did you feel about the Saints offense and the Chiefs matchup?
So I feel so the Saints looked really good, but I don't know if they went out there trying to prove a point that Carr's there. They're going to be a different team now. But it's really hard to judge in the preseason because we just don't know what the Chiefs were showing the Saints. They might have just been letting them score so they could get the ball back to get their offense more reps. Like I don't really know what teams' goals are in the preseason. Like is it to get more offensive reps? Is it to play really good defense? Like and I don't think I think each team has a different goal and I don't think we'll ever know their goal fully. So
Yeah, we can only speculate.
absolutely. If the Saints offense is this good, we just got to wait 3 weeks for Kamara. I think that he could be a steal in this year's draft.
I know that he was someone that you were targeting, and he might be moving up my list just a little bit. So if I can get past New Orleans Saints fans, I might be able to actually draft Kamara at a reasonable price. We'll see. But he looked like he had some juice, so he doesn't look slow at all. And that offense looks better than I anticipated. Granted, all of this is week 1 preseason, so we'll take everything with a grain of salt.
All right. Absolutely.
Okay, well, we made it. We survived. That does it for another episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for downloading and listening to this episode. Please do not forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
As always, you can find us with our handle at N2EFantasy on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, and Threads. Please give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.